phase would be 3 units to be eligible for a loan versus 7 units. That can be significant, especially in today's real estate market. After December 3rd, that's until December 31st, 2010. After December 31st, 2010, at least 50% of the units have to be pre-sold. But still better than the 70% that Fannie and Freddie require. Ownership, and this is a problem with several condominiums, including a question that a property manager had, or actually for a developer client of mine who's in the audience, earlier today, where the project is, let's say, 79 units, and the developer owns 25 of those units. People are having a tough time getting Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, or FHA approval. If it's over 10 units, no more than 10% of the units may be owned by a single entity. The question that we had for Patty, which she's disappointed me by not giving me the answer yet, and we did ask about a half hour ago. I know this would be unacceptable in our office. Is what if you split? I don't think it will work. But what if your microphone's working, isn't it?
Yes,
you can respond.
I'm trying to keep quiet for now. Just give me a moment, though.
Can you break it up so that, let's say there's 28 units, 79 units, so could you break it up into groups of 7? So Eastern Massachusetts LLC owns 7 units, and another LLC controlled by the same developer owns 7, and you create four entities to break it up. We don't think it's going to fly, but all of this is so relatively new that at least we have to ask the questions and see if we can get that creative. The real concern is it really is one entity that owns them, and FHA and Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac are concerned that one entity owning them is going to result, if that person doesn't pay the condominium fees, for example, or mortgage foreclosure, because they don't pay the mortgage, is going to result in disaster for the association. Under 10 units, no more than 1 unit can be owned by a single entity. Concentration. We all should concentrate. Over 4 units. No more than 50% can be FHA insured until 12/31/2010. What the person who prepared this slide failed to state was that that number can go up to 100% on the temporary guidelines until December 31st, 2010. If the building is complete, if it's totally sold, and if that's evidenced by a certificate of occupancy for the sale of the final unit in the condominium. The problem with that is that picture a condominium that was developed, that was built 50 years ago, was converted 20 years ago, 25 years ago. How do you know what the last unit in the complex that was sold? How do you even know if there's a certificate of occupancy that's still around? At least one person doing project approvals has told me that they've been successful in getting HUD to just take a certification by the association that it's 100% complete and 100% sold, and waiving the obligation for the certificate of occupancy. Patty also was successful in getting HUD to waive a certificate of occupancy where the building was converted, say, 10 years ago, but was built 50 years ago, and it wasn't a gut rehab, it was just cosmetic. You don't have to chase the certificate of occupancy from 50 years ago, which may not even exist.
Thank you for recognizing that.
You did a good job, Patty.
Appreciate that.
The concentration decreases to 30% after 12/31/2010. Fannie and Freddie will take 100% of the loans in any community. FHA will do 30%, but that's still better than what FHA currently, or what before December 7th would allow, where they would only take 20%. There was some rule if it was over 30 units and under 30 units, there was a 20% rule and a 10% rule. There's now up to 30% of the loans in a complex that they will take. Less than 4 units, no more than 1 unit can be FHA insured. Legal phasing is permitted, which is not a change, Though I believe that FHA says that if you have a mid-rise or high-rise building, that you have to phase in 5 stories at a time. Developers and attorneys have gotten cute in terms of phasing and have started phasing in 1 unit in a 100-unit complex or 1 floor in a 100-unit complex. It's a little dangerous because what if the project stalls out and doesn't get built? What if there's a fire? Whose insurance covers it? The developers or the associations? But FHA will take 5 stories at a time. Manufactured housing condominium projects are now eligible, whereas they weren't in the past. And project approval will expire 2 years from the date it's been placed on the list of approved condominiums. At the end of my presentation, we'll go into the transition rules. There are some projects that are currently approved that don't have to worry about not being approved on February 1st. They'll have a little more time. FHA, unlike Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, have virtually no requirements as to what the legal documents must say. Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, probably being sharper on this particular issue, want all sorts of protections for mortgage holders, and the managers who see condominium documents all the time have reviewed this protection of mortgagee sections in the condominium documents and the pain of trying to get consent from lenders where it's required. FHA has virtually no legal requirements anymore, other than no right of first refusal if it's discriminatory, and transfer of control must occur the later of 120 days after 75% of the units have been conveyed, or 3 years. In June it was 1 year, they changed it to 3 years, or as required by state law. In Massachusetts, we don't have a state law on when transition from developer control occurs. So in most cases, transition is either going to be at, or in all cases, it's going to be after 120 days after 75% of the units are sold, or 3 years. Developers may have a problem with that since Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac have sort of phased out that requirement on transfer, and we have been putting in condominium documents that control lasts until the last unit in the complex is sold. So developers are going to have to take a particularly hard look at that to see whether they want to lose control of the association that quickly. Adequate budget. This again is a major change from what was required in June. Adequate budget is pretty easy. FHA wants the lender to be looking at the budget to make sure that it has sufficient line items and estimates for cost for those to maintain the property and to preserve the values of the property. They want to see in that budget premiums for insurance and deductible amounts. So if there's a $5,000 deductible, they want to see $5,000 somewhere. For some reason, they seem to concentrate on one loss. And in some cases, I think they'll be satisfied if there's enough in the reserves to cover that deductible. And they require, following what Fannie and Freddie did in the last year and a half or so, that 10% of the budget must be allocated for reserves. Now, somebody tells me I keep doing the math wrong on this, but to me, if you had $1 million budget, $100,000 should be reserves. 900,000 operating, 100,000 reserves. The argument that I've heard is, well, then you're penalizing the condominium association because they're paying 10% of the 100,000 that's just for reserves, so it should be 990,000. I'll just leave it at that. It's approximately 10%, and Patty can deal with it when she gets the applications and reviews the budgets as to exactly what they want there. But figure 10%. The big change is in June. FHA also wanted to see a reserve study. Not only did they want to see a reserve study for the major components, they wanted to see a reserve study good within 12 months, which means that every year associations would have to do a reserve study. The change in the December 7, 2009 requirements is that the reserve study may be